The sequel to Scars of the Syndicate has finally been released, with the continued pursuit of the Syndicate by Grace and Aldred. With the sequel brings new playable units, the first being Farron, another test subject. But the focus today is Grace, in her undercover variant, who is now a 5-star flame sword unit, wielding a sword that can control whim binding to an extent. Though her sword is effective against whim-bound soldiers, Grace herself possesses a unique kit that contains strength debuffing and a seal accumulating mechanic that can empower her attacks and one of her skills. Without further ado, let's find out what she can truly do in a combat situation. Her first skill, Soul Deprivation, costs 3000 SP. It deals 2200% damage to surrounding enemies and reduces enemy strength by 10% for 10 seconds. This is a basic damage dealing skill that also has debuffing capabilities. However, Grace's exclusive ability grants this skill an additional function that will be discussed in the abilities section. What can I say is that this skill simple yet has good damage and good debuffing capabilities and has an additional function that can empower Grace's attacks and her second skill through her exclusive ability. Her second skill, Flame Tongue Unbound, costs 6000 SP. It has an interesting hitbox, dealing 1000% damage towards multiple targets and any enemies near them. This skill also grants Grace a defense amp, with a maximum amp level of 2. Though this skill seems to be an expensive skill with low damage, it actually has a prerequisite. A soul seal should be present prior to using this skill, and the more soul seals Grace possesses, the more this skill hits and the more defense amps it can provide. This totals up to 4000% damage and 4 self amps, which can lead to team amp level 1 plus self amp level 1. This skill is quite interesting, as the damage can sort of jump to nearby enemies, which I have seen before, in Beidou's burst in Genshin, and Lazy's talent in Arknights. Not only that, the soul seal requirement can potentially make this skill an incredibly powerful skill, and provide a lot of amps. Overall, this skill becomes more powerful as the number of soul seals Grace has increases. Undercover Grace has the typical 15% Dragon Haste for sword units, and a decent chain co ability that increases strength by 15% when HP drops to 40% or below. The chain co ability isn't the best, but is definitely one of the better co abilities available right now. Grace is resistant to stun this time around, and like all flame units, having sleep or stun resist isn't really that different from one another. We'll take a look at Grace's exclusive ability, Double-Edged Revelation. This ability grants Grace a soul seal when her first skill hits enemies, with 4 being the maximum amount of soul seals Grace can possess. Not only are the soul seals required for the actual usage and empowerment of her second skill, they also grant Grace certain effects, based on the number of seals. Having 1, 2, and 3 seals increases Grace's damage by 10%, 15% and 20% respectively. As for 4 seals, she gains an immense 80% damage increase, but takes damage during every attack, equal to 2% of her total HP. The highest stacks of seals is definitely a double-edged sword, just like the name of this ability. It must be noted that the attack boosts do not apply to her second skill, a peculiar characteristic. These seals are consumed upon using her second skill, or by shape-shifting. This ability significantly empowers her first skill, and is able to provide Grace with a permanent damage increase until she either shapeshifts, or uses her second skill. If she can manage her HP well, she can have the 80% damage increase up almost permanently. Her other ability gradually recovers her own HP with 5% potency every 2.9 seconds, when she has a team defense amp. The HP regeneration does not have a fixed duration, so it's basically permanent, as long as she has a team defense amp. This ability is seemingly designed to be used after Grace uses her second skill with 4 soul seals, allowing Grace to regenerate HP lost from utilizing double-edged revelation at maximum stacks. This balances her HP loss with HP regen, and molds a certain playstyle and rotation that is optimal for Grace. The role of Undercover Grace in a team is definitely a main DPS, with moderate strength debuffing capabilities. With her greatest damage coming from her normal attacks and her second skill, while having 4 soul seals, having more skill haste is good, in order to gain all 4 seals faster, and getting into her highest damage output as quickly as possible. Other than skill haste, a typical offense build will go wonderfully on Grace. Debuff skill time is also an option, if you really want to utilize the strength debuff from her first skill. For her dragon of choice, any dragon with good damage will certainly do for her. In that regard, Reborn and Neon Mars has always been great options. I would really stress more on damage and power when it comes to dragons for this particular version of Grace. Of course, Horus is another option that can provide both damage increase and greater skill haste through an increase in attack speed. As for who she would team well with, let's first look into her healing ability. As it requires a team defense amp in order to perform healing, normally it would require Grace to use her second skill at 4 seals to achieve it. However, this will also disable her massive damage boost from having 4 seals, in exchange for not letting Grace kill herself. Having another unit that can provide defense amps alongside Grace will mitigate that issue, allowing Grace to keep her damage increase while continuously healing thanks to her ability. For flame units, the only other unit that can provide defense amps is Yuka to clear, so she'll be a great partner for Grace. Other than that, there isn't really any other particular aspects to look after when having Undercover Grace in a team. For her Wimprint setup, I would go with the following build. I'm definitely focusing fully on offense on her, dealing high amounts of damage. Unfortunately, her banner is still a skip, as I'm saving for Gala Dragalia, and adamantly refuse to spend any real money into the game. With Grace possessing a sword even before her sword variant is released, it is nice to see Grace finally utilizing the sword in a combat role. Its power combined with the knowledge of Grace is reflected well in her overall kit, making Grace one of the hard hitters in the game. She is purely DPS, with a dash of strength debuffing, but lacks damage over time capabilities, which could be a potential weakness given the meta. But, the power Grace wields kind of makes that weakness obsolete. Another weakness that can be pointed out is her high risk playstyle at maximum seals, as she loses HP with every strike. A high risk high reward playstyle that can be made safer with reliable healing, though without healing, this playstyle might not be for everybody. But overall, Undercover Grace is a powerhouse of a unit, sacrificing HP for massive damage, and a great DPS unit in general. Now go out there and continue the mission to destroy every base of operations of the Syndicate, while eventually carving a way for an encounter with the top management of this wretched organization. That's all from me. Moga out.